Om Tare Tu Tare Tu Re Soha. Om Tare Tu Tare Tu Re Soha. Om Tare Tu Tare Tu Re Soha. Om Tare Tu Tare.
Well, good evening, everyone. Such a joy to be able to have another opportunity to unpack these very precious teachings with this, from His Holiness and, Big Sunni Thubten Chödron. I am recording this today because I'm traveling, so unfortunately I'm not able to be physically present at the Dharma Center. I am recording from Midland, Texas today. I will be home later this evening and just continue wherever we are to unpack these very precious teachings. So wonderful that we have this technology. So my goal today is to provide some commentary on these teachings and to allow a little time for you all to have some discussion. I know there'll be some people at the Dharma Center in Carbondale, also at the Here and Now Center in Gunnison, and of course, those of you online from your home. So I'm grateful that we have this opportunity to use technology in this way. Tonight's teaching, we will go to the next section in the text on mind, rebirth, and self. Last week, we had a whole teaching on mind, the nature of mind, and we unpacked this Buddhist understanding of mind being correlated with the brain, but separate from the brain. The brain and mind are different things, but they're very much correlated. Today, we'll unpack a little bit more of that in this next section. We're going to skip a little piece in on the section on mind, which is the ultimate nature of mind, which is empty. And the reason for that is we'll have lots of opportunity to talk about emptiness, but in this next section on mind, rebirth, and self, when we get to self, there'll be, again, this unpacking of the empty nature of self. And I think that'd be a nicer tie-in to the ultimate nature of mind as well. So we're just going to skip that little section for now and then come to our next section here with the Buddhist approach of this path and understanding from a Buddhist perspective, the nature of mind and rebirth. We probably won't get to the self today. Again, that will be a very full teaching, which I intend to get to next week. So let's go and pull up the text, see where we're at. So here we are at, again, mind. So we're going to unpack that a bit more. And then this understanding of rebirth within the Buddhist context here. Our body and mind influence each other while we're alive, although they have different natures and different continua. The body is material and depends on physical causes. Okay, so already going to talk about different natures. The body is material. It depends on physical causes such as sperm and egg of our parents to come into existence. We eat food, right? Also material in nature. This is the condition that allows our body to survive and grow. So again, we're making these distinctions between material and non-material. The body's material, the body requires material matter, basically, to survive. And the conditions that give rise to our body, material. The mind, however, is not matter and cannot be known or measured by scientific instruments designed to measure matter, right? So it needs different instruments. According to those who advocate scientific reductionism, the mind's nothing more than the brain. Other scientists, however, assert that the mind is a function of brain processes, and that mental processes and emotional experiences either correlate with or are due to biochemical processes in the brain. So what they're saying here is some scientists, just think of the brain as the mind. That's what it is. Others do recognize that the mind is different than the brain, and that the mind arises from, it's an emergent property of these mental processes and these biochemical processes rather in the brain. So we have these biochemical processes, chemicals, electricity, things that happen in the brain, and as a result then our mental and emotional experiences arise, or they arise from the brain. Okay, so that's the probably a very common thought process. However, many aspects of our mind cannot be accounted for by this neuroscientific view. Again, Buddhism is going to kind of point to these things, and now actually quite a few neuroscientists point to this as well. For example, by simply looking at chemical processes in the brain, we cannot determine if a thought is valid, if it is an instant of knowledge or an affliction. So, right, we can have processes, chemicals and electricity happening. We can point to that, we can measure it, we can see it, but we don't know what thought will arise in the mind. We don't know if that thought would be one that makes sense or is an afflictive thought. It doesn't make sense. It's not rational, right? Just by noting the activity of the brain. By examining brain processes, we cannot discern whether a mental event is a direct perceiver of a sense object or a conception, a memory or a thought about something. So again, just brain processes, is that we have mental events, we have thoughts, we have images, we have things that arise. Well, is it a direct perceiver of something within our senses, or is it just a concept, a memory, a thought that's arising without a sense thing like touch, sight, sound, etc.? Right? We're just seeing chemicals and electricity. At an experiential level, there is a very great difference between the pain that we experience due to our own situation and the pain that comes from compassion for the suffering of others, right? So we have our own emotional pain that we have from our own experience, but we can also have empathy. We can experience pain of others, and so it's not our direct pain, but there's some mental and emotional suffering. The experience of our own pain arises involuntarily and forcefully, right? And we usually respond to it with fear or anger. The pain that is attendant upon compassion for another suffering has an element of deliberate sharing and embracing of that pain, and we react to it with courage. However, in terms of the biochemical processes in the brain, these two types of pain are indistinguishable, right? So what's happening in the brain is the same thing, but what's happening in our experience is very different. A pain that's directly arising that we don't want to feel, that is arising within our experience, versus our willingness to have some empathy and compassion and experience the pain of others. Brain biochemical processes, same thing, but you and I are experiencing something very different. Another point that they'd make here is tears can well up in our eyes when we feel joyful or very sad. On a physical level, our eyes do not distinguish the two, right? It's just crying, it's tears. But on a mental and emotional level, there's a big difference in the cause of the tears and how we experience them. For all these reasons, it's difficult to claim that all aspects of our experiential consciousness can be explained simply through biological processes of the brain. So, some clear points here. Our experience is It's very unique. It's very, very unique and subjective to our conditioning, the lives that we've experienced, what's happening in our mind and experience can be vast. Whereas the processes in the brain, we can point to, well, there's this area of the brain, there's this activity of the brain, there's these things happening, and they're correlated, right? I can have this experience of compassion or pain or joy, and we can see these activities, these processes in the brain. But if you just activate the brain and have these chemicals, electricity, and things happen, whether it's some type of suffering or certain types of compassion or empathy or things of that nature, you can see different activity in the brain, but on a emotional, experiential level, a mental level, can be very different things rather than just the activity of the brain itself. So Buddhism is going to say that's not really going to work very well to understand our mind, and that these are very different things. They're correlated and then they relate to each other. And so we'll unpack that in this section a bit more. The text is going to now go into an understanding of causes and conditions. So in order for things to exist, there needs to be a cause, right? Our bodies don't come from nowhere. Our mind doesn't come from nowhere. It just doesn't appear, right? There's causes and conditions. There's causes for things to happen. Things can't just magically appear. And so now understanding that we have a mind that's not matter, right? A mind that is not material. A brain that is material, a body that's material. We live in a physical world that is material. And that there's causes that give rise to things, right? If we want a tree, we plant a seed, a material seed, and we have dirt, soil, water, etc., conditions that will give rise to a tree. A tree won't grow without a seed. So the first part of the section is starting to identify the difference between matter, material, and non-material experience of our lives, of our minds, of our bodies. So let's get back to the text here. All functioning things, things that produce effects, come about due to causes and conditions. To trace back the causes and conditions of our present body, we follow a sequence of material causes and effects that goes to our parents and generations of previous ancestors, right? Scientists posit the theory of evolution when tracing back the origin of the human body, right? Evolution, so we can kind of see the material things, how things arose, our parents, our grandparents, etc., and how it traces back. Before life existed on Earth, the continua of physical elements that later became our bodies were present, and their continua are traced back to the Big Bang. All right, so that's our scientific understanding, and that all makes sense. Since matter, be it gross or subtle, was present at the time of the Big Bang and even before it, its causes must also have been matter or energy that can transform into matter, right? Even the Big Bang didn't come from nowhere. There had to be something. Although our body wasn't present when this universe began to form, its previous continuity in the form of material causes and physical elements was, right? And so what created the world, the universe, is the things that have come into being out of material, came out of material causes. The conditions are also present to give life and oxygen, and life as we know it came from other material causes. I think there's like stardust and things that people talk about that's within everything. Not a scientist, but you get the idea that things don't come from nothing. Material causes and conditions have given rise to the planets, the life that we have, to the forms that we know. What I find interesting here is even he's pointing out that in the Kala Chakra Tantra, according to that, the ultimate source of the body is space particles that exist between the disappearance of the previous universe and the production of the subsequent one. They provide a continuum of potential for material during that time. So even in Buddhist teachings, ancient teachings, they understand these things around space particles and things that they're finding today in research around the sort of stardust and things that are part of the life that we have. There's even in the text, things that are similar to atoms and so forth. And Buddhists did not have microscopes and all these tools of measurement and observation that we have today. So I do find that rather fascinating that they can also know these things. So that's physical. Now we're going to get to non-physical. It is difficult to identify the essential characteristics of mind. On a daily level, we experience sensory perceptions and the thoughts that chase after objects of the senses. So we have these sense consciousness here. They'll talk about the sense perceivers, our visual, auditory, olfactory, gustatory taste, and tactile consciousnesses. So these are the five consciousnesses that we know of, right? Eyes, hearing, etc., taste, our tactile, our feeling, so forth. So these are senses. This is what, this sense consciousness then goes to our mind that perceives them, that responds to them, that experiences them. But all these sense consciousnesses focus on the external world and assume the aspect of the objects that they perceive. Right. So sound, I hear the sound, bird, etc., and we respond to that, these objects out here. The conceptual mind that thinks about these objects also assumes the aspects of these external objects. And even when our mind is directed inward to our feelings, it assumes the aspect of the feelings, right? So, and what they're pointing out here, it's difficult for us to separate out the clarity and cognizance of the mind and be aware of the mind alone without also being aware of its objects, what we're listening to or what we're feeling or what we're experiencing. We're very identified with that. I am angry. I am hearing a sound. There's a noise. That person's annoying. The mind is constantly identified with what it's experiencing. And whether it's a feeling, whether it's a sound, whether it's a sensation, I'm in pain, I am, right? The mind is experiencing pain. It's identified with the pain. Joy, it's identified with the joy. The sounds, the music I'm listening to, it's identified with that. The food I'm eating, it's delicious or not delicious. And so we've got these five consciousness. Right? Yeah. And the sixth conscious mind itself, right? There's actually within the Yogacara system, 8 consciousnesses, the 5, the 6 is the conceptual mind, the mind that we think with, the mind that is experiencing all of this. And what they're talking about here is that it's very difficult to just identify that mind. separate from what the mind's engaged with through our senses. And he's going to make a point here that this can be done now. Oops. Let me pull up the text. I clicked on the incorrect button there. I want the share screen button. There we go. They point out, however, with meditation, it is possible to experience the nature of the mind. So again, what we talked about last week, this sheer knowing, this clarity, this cognizance, the very nature of the mind. So we can observe this, we can experience this without all the other sense consciousness. As a matter of fact, with the practice of shamatha meditation, we do a short shamatha before we begin each teaching, where we just focus on the breath. We rest our attention on the breath. The teachings on shamatha that go through all 9 levels and achieving shamatha, the state of calm abiding, is actually a method to know the nature of the mind, to rest in that nature of just clarity and cognizance, this luminous, this knowing mind. And what happens when you train in that method, when you fully engage in this method, it takes a very strong dedication, a conducive environment. There's people right now I know at Lama Alan Wallace's center in Crestone who are doing exactly this. There'll be a year, 2 years in a conducive environment focused on cultivating shamatha, this meditation practice, where the other sense consciousnesses actually, you don't even become aware of them, right? They shut down, and you basically are able to just rest in the very nature of your mind. And so this can be known, it can be experienced. We don't necessarily have to go through all of that. We can have tastes of that in our own practices if we do them regularly, and we'll get little tastes. We'll know what it's like to just know the nature of the mind. So this method is available to us, and it is something we can directly experience. It's been replicated hundreds of thousands of times. Nothing fancy about it. But in our normal experience, very difficult to separate, and that mind itself from what I'm worried about, what I'm angry about, what's going on. We have a very busy, active, cognitive mind that's identified with the objects it's attending to. Worry, fear, doubt, what's in front of me, food, smell, sensations in my body. It's just caught up and infused with all of these things. But it can be experienced directly and separated from all those things. That's the point they're making there. Okay. Let's get back here. Results are produced from concordant causes. Okay, so we're talking about cause and effect. Things don't happen from nothing. Results, right? The results, the cause and effect. So results are produced from concordant causes that have the ability to produce them. Okay, concordant causes are causes that have the ability to produce them. They cannot arise from discordant causes. Since the mind is immaterial, its substantial cause, the principal thing that transforms into a particular moment of mind, must also be immaterial. So here's a real clear point in Buddhism, that causes that give rise to something, concordant cause, needs to be of the same stuff, right? So if you want a material thing, there has to be a material thing that is present. The common analogy that I know many of you have heard me share, it's just so clear to me, is the cause for a tree is the seed, right? The seed of the tree is the same stuff that becomes the tree, right? And the soil, the nutrients, the water, the sun, those are all conditions. None of those can give rise to a tree. No seed, no tree. The seed's the same stuff that becomes the tree, and the tree, the sprout, the tree, and all that. It's really the same stuff. It transforms. It is the primary cause of a tree. Everything else, soil and everything else, water, nutrients, sun, those are conditions, secondary conditions, but not primary cause. So they're making a point here. Cause for mind has to be of the same stuff. So it's going to be immaterial. Right. And, here you're going to see just the clarity around Buddhist thought, very scientific, very deliberative, very objective in its approach. Nothing mystical here. They're just saying, well, that's immaterial. Well, the cause has to be immaterial. Okay. Go back to it. This is the cause for our mind, immaterial. This is the preceding moment of mind, right? So the moment prior to this moment gave rise to this moment, and this moment will give rise to the next moment of mind. One moment of mind arises due to the previous moment of mind, which arose due to the moment of mind that preceded it. This can be traced back to the time of conception. The moment of mind at the time of conception arose due to a cause, a previous moment of mind. And in this way, the continuum of mind prior to this life is established. So that's two things being said here. One is the mind that arose that's related to our body, conception. But the body's material, the mind's not material. So he's making a point here as well that the continuum of mind prior to this life established that there had to be consciousness prior that gave rise. This didn't come from nowhere. It didn't just, there's no life, there's a body, and now this mind arose. But it will also talk about, as we get into this, how the mind that we're experiencing in this body is connected to this body. But there's a more subtle mind, a consciousness that was present even prior to that. Conception is the coming together of the sperm, egg, and the subtle mind. Okay, so sperm and egg, obviously, parents, but the mind, which is not of our parents, is also in union with this. This creates a new life. The material aspect of this new life, the sperm and egg, come from the parents. The immaterial conscious aspect, the mind, does not come from the parents. It must come from a previous moment of mind, which at the moment of conception is the mind of a being in a previous life. Okay, now we're getting into rebirth and this understanding that the mind, this very subtle mind, which was there before sperm and egg met, is going to conjoin with, to become a part of the sperm and egg. It's all going to be in union, and then we're, whoever we are, comes to life with a mind and a body. At the time of death, the body and the mind separate. Here too, they have a different continuum. The body becomes a corpse and is recycled in nature. The mind continues on, one moment of mind producing the next. In the case of ordinary beings, the mind usually takes a new body and another life begins. So this is another key point. And we'll go ahead and get through this process of rebirth. But what I want to point out here is that this is all a continuum. It's not, I have a soul that's not changing a soul that that is permanent thing, that is who I am, that goes day to day, experiences a form, my body dies, I go to heaven, I go to hell, I go wherever it goes. There's no this sort of stable I that's a part of this, but much rather a stream of consciousness, a continuum of mind. So it's much more the stream that's flowing moment to moment to moment within this body in this moment. And the previous moment of mine gave rise to this moment. I'm different now. The thoughts I'm having as I'm speaking, they're arising in dependence upon all the previous experiences I've had. And the store of consciousness, this very subtle consciousness that has stored all my memories, my imprints, the karmic imprints, the things that I've done, the events that have happened to me. And in contact now with this computer and this camera and the things that I'm talking about, I'm arising in dependence upon these conditions. And I am different now than I was an hour ago, and I'll be different in an hour from now. The mind will go through different moments, and even the body's changing as well, but the mind is this continuum. And the idea is that when this body dies, the mind sees and experiences different without a body. And at some point it will start, unify with some more physical matter and start experiencing things differently. So everything just becomes, the world I'm experiencing, the body I'm experiencing, everything is experienced differently. So this basis becomes, again, reasoning, being rational, observing, and then, of course, direct experience. Within Tibetan Buddhism, there's very specific texts on what happens to the body at the time of death, what your mind experiences at the time of death, as each element dissolves, the earth element and so forth within our body, what the mind will experience. There's clear directions about that. And there's clear directions about, and what these great yogis do is stay conscious during the death process, and how to train in that while you're alive, so that as the body dies, you can be lucid, you can be conscious of the process, and then be conscious as the body dies, and be conscious during the transition beyond the physical dying and a new rebirth. And so for, we have these reincarnated masters. Technically, from a Buddhist perspective, reincarnation, just rebirth, it just happens all the time. Most of us aren't aware of it. We're not aware of previous life. We're not aware of any of that. We just become aware in this life that we have. But conscious rebirth is one in which someone has maintained that awareness and had some agency, a choice about the next one. They're actually consciously involved in that process. And so those are what we talk about as tukus, or reincarnated masters, who can be directly conscious of previous life and this life, and choose in the next life. And there's yogis that practice this. We have these texts on them, and they point out these folks. They're identified, but what's different is they did it consciously. Now, this may seem far-fetched to people, and the idea here is not that you just believe it just because this is what's being taught. It's to explore. It's to, does this hold up? Does it make sense? Does it not make sense? And not to adopt anything that doesn't make sense to you. The thing that I would point out is it takes probably, I think, a lot more faith in some ways to think that your consciousness just ends when your body does. I mean, there's no proof of that either, right? There's no proof that the mind is an emergent property of brain processes. And so either way, it's something to be explored. Is there any evidence that it would die? Is there any evidence that mind would continue? Of course, there's a lot of books, a lot of texts. I mean, they're going to use a couple of analogies in here, but there's tons of books and stories about, what happens at the time of death and near-death experiences, what people remember and what that's like, this continuum. There's, of course, lots of books about people remembering previous lives, and there's research where people go back and try to validate the stories, and books on that where people have identified those things. And here we'll use a couple of their analogies, and I'll talk a little bit about that. So let's get back to the text here. Buddhist scriptures describe different levels of types of mind in terms of levels of mind. There are coarse consciousnesses, such as our 5 sense consciousnesses, and then subtler consciousnesses, such as our mental consciousnesses that thinks and dreams, and the subtlest mind that becomes manifest in ordinary beings at the time of death. Okay, so that's this very subtle mind we call sort of stored consciousness. And I'm more familiar with Yogacara. 8 consciousnesses, the 5 sense, plus then the 6th one is the conventional mind that we think with. And then the 8th is this very subtle store consciousness that they're talking about. This mind stream of life to life. And so that's what they're talking about here. The subtlest mind, which goes from one life to the next, can persist without depending on a coarse physical body, including the brain and nervous system. The subtlest mind is a continuity of ever-changing moments of mind. It is not a permanent self or soul. The terms subtlest mind and fundamental innate mind of clear light are merely designated in dependence upon a continuum of extremely subtle transitory moments of clarity and cognizance. So again, back to that very subtle mind, just awareness itself, clarity and cognizance, stripped bare of body, stripped bare of all the concepts. It's luminous, it's non-conceptual, it's actually quite blissful. So a lot of people talk about that bliss at the time of death. Our very nature of mind is blissful, luminous, it's knowing, it's non-conceptual. It doesn't have to think and put all these concepts on. It's just awareness in this pure form. The Buddha explained the continuity of life and rebirth principally on the basis of the continuity of mind. The continuity of mind across lifetimes is not the gross level mind. That's that is dependent on a physical body, that sort of 6th consciousness. It is the subtlest mind, the fundamental innate mind of clear light, that is the final basis of designation of the person that connects one life with the next. The detailed explanation of this mind is found only in texts in the highest yoga class of Buddhist tantras. That's where they really break down what happens at the time of death and what practices to do, how to engage in it, how to do it consciously. Very, very right down to the detail. And here we get to some of their analogies, to some of their examples. Rebirth can be validated by personal experience. I've heard about a Tibetan boy who could read without being taught. Some people may say this is due to his genetic makeup, but to me, it makes more sense to say that it's due to the continuity of his consciousness from a previous life, right? That he can just do this. I also heard about an Indian girl who had many memories of her previous life. Her parents from her previous life and this life met and confirmed the details. So now, both now accept her as her daughter. She sets of parents, so she has 4 parents. So these are, obviously just two things that he's pointing out too. But there is, if we really look at it, why does someone come in this world, and they're a prodigy? Why does someone come in this world? They're young and they have all this knowledge. Why do twins, same genetics, some have different attributes and different qualities, different dispositions. When same genetics, same everything. Why, why do these kids that come into the world, same parents, same family, have very different dispositions and so forth? I think for me, it's just so much evidence in terms of kids I've met that are very young. I've met some that are just really drawn to saving life. This one friend's daughter in preschool didn't want people to kill the worms, and this thing that came out of nowhere, and wanted to be vegetarian, and not that her parents were. How does all that happen? And so for me, it just makes a lot of sense that our previous life, previous conditioning, these imprints that are stored in the stored subtle consciousness that conjoins with sperm and egg and body and form come together in a particular way. But again, these are things to explore yourself, to just open the mind and look at things, question things, see what works for you. Key to Buddhism is not to accept anything simply because it's said. Just explore it, to investigate it, to analyze it, to challenge it, and to see what makes sense. That's the Buddhist approach: debate, analyzing, understanding. Okay. So generally speaking, once a mind conjoins with a fertilized egg, a new life has begun. In dependence upon that body and mind, we designate the person, living being, I or self. Our outlook on life, perceptions, feelings, and emotions are all based on that notion of self. We say, I did this. I think that, I feel sad or happy. Although this is our experience, seldom have we stopped to ask ourselves, who is this I upon which everything is predicated? The question of regarding the identity of the self is important because it is the self, the I, that wants to be happy and avoid suffering. If the self existed independently from other phenomena, we should be able to isolate and identify it. So that is where we're going to pause for today. Next teaching, we're going to now come up with and explore the methods around identifying I, what we identify with as self. And then I think we can tie that back to, as I talked about at the beginning, the empty nature of mind and the sort of empty nature of self, which kind of creates all the issues in our lives in so many ways. So hopefully today we are getting some clarity around just Buddhist understanding of our experience of mind, of body, of self, of rebirth. We'll have lots of time to talk more about that next time we have some discussion. Maybe we can also answer some questions there. I would like to encourage all of you to stay a little bit and just kind of, if you have some discussion, some thoughts around what was brought up today, around mind, around rebirth, around causes and results. Can something arise from nothing? Or does there need to be a cause? If there needs to be a cause, primary cause being of the same stuff that gives rise, a concordant cause, not something, right? If I want an apple tree, I can't plant an orange seed. I mean, I can plant an orange seed, but I won't get an apple tree, right? Won't do it. So likewise, then this, again, Buddhist thinking, Buddhist rationale, Buddhist reasoning, mind, non-material? How does that arise? And again, as always, I encourage you to kind of explore this week, this teaching, and notice how the mind grabs onto I am angry, I am this, I'm experiencing that. And can we tap into a little bit of our mind that's a little more subtle, that is experiencing deliciousness? Not the food's delicious, but I'm experiencing deliciousness. Not I am feeling anxious, right? I am anxious, or I'm experiencing some anxiety. Can I tap into that mind which observes the experience instead of the mind that's infused with it? And see if you can notice that, because we'll be infused most of the time. But we are capable of cultivating an awareness, an observer of the experiences, and have that access to that awareness of mind, which relates, even how I can have some choice over which thoughts to attend to. I can have some choice over how I experience something. So a lot of agency, if I can tap into that, into how I experience life. Okay, well, I better wrap up. I think I went just a bit over my time here. I do hope that you all are well, that you're able to explore these ideas, and most importantly, that they become meaningful in your life in productive ways. Where we're going with all this is to understand how, if I understand myself, my mind, my experience, I can understand then how my experience cultivates in a direct experience of suffering or happiness. What are the causes of suffering and the causes of happiness, and how I can cultivate a life with much more joy, happiness, well-being, resiliency, and eliminate those causes of this mental and emotional suffering that I experience. All of Buddhism is really about how to eliminate suffering. So some pretty good things here. Okay, let's go ahead and take a moment to dedicate the merit and the wisdom that we have cultivated here in our time. I'll pop that up for those of you who do not have the dedication prayer available. Taking just a moment here to recognize the incredible value of our time and energy and these precious teachings. Let's dedicate. By this merit, may I soon attain the enlightened state of Guru Buddha, that I may be able to liberate all sentient beings from their sufferings. May the precious Bodhi mind not yet born arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore. All right. Thank you all so much. Please be well.
Om Tare Tu Tare Tu Re Soha. Om Tare Tu Tare Tu Re Soha.